Hello, I'm Rianna Walcott. I am a youngish Black woman who looks quite tired because I'm in the US right now and it's very early. I've got my hair up in a bun and I'm wearing a white dress. So today we're talking about home, which is, of course, as Linda's thankfully explained, like a very generative area for discussion and very productive here. So we happen to have three different panelists, myself included, that are approaching home from very different contexts, but that speak to different parts of the world and different diasporas that we all engage in our work. So just to foreground some of these ideas, we'll be thinking a bit about where home looks on local to global stages, about migration and the different meanings of home to us. We're also thinking a lot about the way that technologies can be used in artwork that thinks about home, the position of the XR spectrum within technology. And for anyone who doesn't know what that means, that's extended reality, which is inclusive of the range from augmented reality through to fully immersive virtual reality, and the different ways that we can access some of those technologies, like through our browsers, headsets, online, or installations on site, and what those technologies might offer to audience, empathy, immersion, and the ways that that can help with our storytelling about home. So I will stop talking about that now and hand over to our first panelist to give us a quick introduction. So Daya, if you wouldn't mind turning on, and I will screen share.
Hi everyone. So I'm a young South Asian woman. I'm wearing a brown top and jewelry. So I am a visual artist who explores stories of the South Asian diaspora through immersive art and installation and storytelling. And I'm really inspired by the richness and maximalism within Indian visual culture, where like details and color and pattern hold a lot of symbolism, and they're not just aesthetic. They carry these stories, identity, and cultural knowledge. And I'm interested in how these visual layers in this language kind of relate to the layers of self, of what shapes us, what we inherit, and what we continue to transform. And through this visual language, I explore these untold stories of the diaspora and stories that I didn't really see represented. So my work really explores themes of home, belonging, unbelonging, migration, and histories that have kind of shaped British South Asian communities. So I'm particularly interested in this relationship between the past, present, and future. And that's why my practice really brings together a lot of kind of traditional processes like textiles and hand painting with contemporary technology. And as a second generation British born South Asian, like my work not only explores stories about my generation, but I'm really interested in the generations before me who've shaped these stories. And yeah, I'm trying not to like recreate culture, but explore what's been inherited, adapted, transformed. And I'm really interested in exploring this idea about identity and heritage not being something that's quite fixed or in the past, but something that's quite living and layered and continues to shape who we are. So one of my key works is my hand painted Indian market cart, which is in the top right. And it's basically called A Home Away from Home. And this cart was inspired by everyday market carts found in India. And I was exploring this parallel between India and Warsaw's market traditions. And I became really interested in looking at the cart beyond itself and exploring the stories it carried. And this cart became kind of this mobile archive of lived experience. And to me, like every market cart has its own story. And this one highlighted like the South Asian migrant experience. So there's lots of objects and layers to this cart, which kind of explore the stories of people and the goods that have traveled across the world. And it kind of celebrated this like resilience and adaptability of migrant communities, of creating these like spaces of belonging. And it reflected on how these like vibrant traditions have kind of become an integral part of British community life. So it's really inspired by like a conversation I had with my grandma, who was saying how like at one point when they first moved to the UK that there wasn't you weren't able to access so much like the textiles, different types of food, but like now it's quite like you can go down the street and find anything you're looking for. And yeah, it kind of made me reflect on how like culture continues to move and evolve and shape the places that we call home. Um, and then another significant body of work is my Sari. So my first Sari was like a response to archival photographs in the Wolverhampton Art Gallery collection. And I became really interested in how this very ancient garment still holds relevance today. It's still worn today. Um, and I just became interested in how it's traveled across time, but also across place. And to me, it's quite a futuristic garment because it's of its ability to like continuously transform and adapt. And exploring this idea of like futurism, I started experimenting with AR. And this so really represented like that story of past, present, future. And then from that sari, I developed Sari that remembers. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this Sari was developed in a digital first program with the Space and Creative Black Country. And this Sari kind of explores the Sari as a carrier of memory. And I just imagine this Sari that's like absorbed all these memories and it's lived this life. And when you interact with it, it speaks to you. So this sari is really detailed, it's very tactile and layered, and audiences are encouraged to kind of interact with it by placing their hand on the sari, and then it responds through like a really beautiful soundscape of India. And I was exploring this like sensory connection to home, which can be carried through sounds and rituals and everyday experiences. Um, so yeah, home I think is a really central theme of my practice. And as someone from the diaspora, I think home can be connected to like where we come from, where we live, the spaces we create for ourselves. And through my work, I really explore home, not just as a physical place, but something we carry within us through our stories, through our objects, connections. And I explore home in a very like dreamlike and unresolved kind of way, where I think it comes from this place where I'm like searching for this sense of belonging. I think when home doesn't feel completely within reach and you can't fully grasp that feeling because it's like distant, multiple, or always shifting, I feel like I hold on to like those physical things, which is why those colors and those patterns and those layers come through my work. And I think home can exist through like textures, sounds, recipes, clothing. And home for me is very linked to a lot of the maternal figures in my family who've kind of shaped these values and carried these traditions and kind of been a bridge between cultures. But yeah, so I'll see my practice as a way of kind of creating spaces where people can also kind of reconnect with their own ideas of home and their own stories.
My name is Donald, um, and I'm an artist with long black hair, with a black t-shirt on, and yeah, Chinese, middle-aged. It's called Homex, which was a an experimental theatre production that incorporated both VR, gaming, theatre, music, opera, music, and singing and performance, and digital gaming. I think I'll probably just talk through this as you see through it, but what you're seeing here is, in a sense, half of the actual production of the performers. So one performer is situated in Hong Kong, and the other one is in the UK, and they are digitally captured, 3D scanned into the space, and you enter, watch it on a 270-degree screen, at the um, theater, or you enter it as a as an avatar in a game-like approach. This whole idea that bridging two time zones and connecting both physically and digitally, but creating that sense of belonging by creating the in a sense the what's the word? Um, those interactions and the act of being within the space. The actual so this project was help funded by the space, and I kind of led the 3D worlding, because of my links to both the UK and Hong Kong. And that led to and Ting Chang and Ian Gallagher to start this project. So I didn't always do tech or like in terms of XR. That was a little bit later in my practice. But I'm a chartered architect, and I've always had that dual practice in my work. And starting with something relatively hand printed, I kind of like jumped to what Daya said about being that haptic feeling. But what I liked about my earlier parts of my practice being that printmaking gives you that haptic feel to the creating the work. And I always kind of reflect back on my cultural upbringing since I was born in the UK and, well, in the North, Liverpool specifically, and trying to navigate that, both that identity and similar to Dai, that sense of trying to understand or navigate that sense of belonging. And it's something, again, I agree with Dai, that it's a constant, you're constantly trying to chip away at it, and trying to understand a little bit further. But I always said, like, and in terms of like the 3D and like the use of AR, for one of my earlier projects, Augmented Chinatown, which was a site-specific augmented reality application that linked in with a kind of a tour around Chinatown. And that was kind of linked to uh, the act of being in that sense was related to the kind of like, the situationist and the whole drifting across the city and actively understanding both the history of the place, but referencing kind of these digital sculptures that looked into different types of mythology, which helps define some of the inspires some of my work. But yeah.
So, hello. As you know, I'm Rianna. Updated audio description, added some glasses. But so this is a research project that I've been working on for the last 2 years that is very nearly finished at the University of Maryland, where I work and teach. And this is called the Black Homeplaces project. And it begins from from a personal perspective, as many as our other panelists have talked about as well, the relationship between diaspora and migration. Myself being a Black Brit, I'm from London. My family's from the Caribbean. And on this slide, what you can see is multiple of the different homes in my family across the diaspora. So in the top left is my maternal grandparents in their home in London. And then, in the middle, the two orangey, middle and top right, are two different family homes in Jamaica. And then in the bottom left is my paternal grandparents' home in Jamaica as well. And then I've also got some other photos of my family's homes in Barbados. So really what is happening here was myself and many of the other contributors in this project, as we have contributors from across different parts of the Black diaspora representing, Black Americans, in the US, as well as South America, folks from within the Caribbean, some contributors from West Africa, and as well as the UK. And we've got, I think it's about 32 different collaborators with multiple projects that are involved in this. And in this project, we've recreated a VR house, which I'll show you a little bit of on the next slide. But what this does is it is a combination of both like scholarly research, activism, art, and thinking about archives and homes as the home that we live in as a process of curation, as a process of participation in co-creating what home means to us, and also as a place that is at once futuristic and retrospective, that thinks about what home could be, how it is interrupted by migration, and the parts of it that stay consistent even as we move around the globe, like the elements of the home in Jamaica that I then see reproduced in the homes in London. So this is at once a personal, but also a generic and diasporic experience. So in this slide, where it's just going to whiz you through, and this is really sneak peek, it's not finished. I'm still working with the engineers right now, but you'll see a few of the projects on high speed. But what you can see here are a few of the different projects contained. You'll see lots of representation of my own family inside it as well. That's curator's privilege there. And just the ways that we are taking these elements of Afro diasporic homes and showing where they overlap. Here is a mural that's being painted, which is being painted live in the studio that we, that we work in. And you can see that folks are painting their own elements to combine into that mural. So like really taking part of that sort of collaborative and externalized project there. There are also, the project that you move through inside the installation links out to lots of different other projects. So this one here on screen, Linda Leaks, is an activist that's set up multiple housing co-ops in the DC DMV area. So we're thinking about ways that people are writing about and talking about their own personal histories, as with this smaller home that these folks have made that has their that tracks their movement from Senegal to America, but also like commemorating home building in an activist sense as well. So the way that Linda Leaks has set up about 40 co-ops over years, thinking about housing as also a space of resistance, and how we can like combine all of those different approaches to home, to reality and resistance within like speculative and thinking about futuristic ways of approaching home and what, thinking about what the home might look like for us across the diaspora as well. Welcome back. There are obviously some very generative overlaps in our work as well, and I would love to just like take some time to chat and explore some of those things. So I'll start with a softball like for all of us that speaks to some of our overlaps there. Across a lot of our work, we were thinking about some of these like metaphors for home and speaking to it using like different symbols that are such as the car, such as mythology and so on, that appear across like all of our work. That's like a kind of a more general entry point into that stands for diaspora and thinks about the sort of like the multiple places that happens. How do those sort of interact within your work? Or would you mind speaking to a little bit about the sort of metaphors that you're using? I'll start with Daya.
Yeah, so I explore like a lot of those like physical forms, like the cart, the sari, kind of looking beyond them as just being an object, like I'm interested in the story that they carry, their histories, the traditions, the experiences of the people that have interacted with them. And I think these forms can hold like a lot about the past and the present. And like sometimes these cultural objects are viewed as quite distant artifacts and something in the past, but I'm interested in exploring how they're quite living and they continue to hold these meaning and emotions and relevance today, which is why I take these familiar objects and invite people to kind of experience them differently.
No, I definitely agree with you there with you saying the stories kind of travel across geographies because it's like myth and stories aren't they're not grounded in physical geography itself. You can kind of carry it with you, which is that's what I noticed that's also in both your works, Daya and Rihanna. In the Rihanna in your the co-op space, there was a tree in one of the kind of images, and then on your sari there's a tree, but the tree also formulates in multiple parts of my work. One kind of a big link to that kind of world building, like Yazadrill in Norse mythology, but also it was the tree. I think not many people know this, or I've written this on my website, but the tree in home ec that you've just seen then is the like what's the word? It's a tree that in terms of my family's kind of village in Hong Kong, inside next to that tree there's a little temple, and that temple there's a little plaque that indicated about the original migrational linkage from the China down the Pearl River into Hong Kong, and it said, take a left or take a right, can't remember, when you get to the old tree next to the temple, and that tree still exists today, and it's a really large I think it's a banyan tree that sits at a point in time for the diaspora to return to because they always have a festival there every few years.
That's
Um,
brilliant. I mean, one of our contributors also thinking about family trees as well in that last one we went through, where they made a museum dedicated to their own home and migration, and thinking about like people tracing their genealogy through that, and like the home as a space that contains those documents that also fill up your, the family tree and like root you together. That's really interesting. I wanted to ask, because we're thinking about multiple people involved in some of this, in lots of this work, and the collaborative nature of our position in the world and our relationship to home. What does it mean to you guys to collaborate in work like this, to balance both, personal aspects with the communal in representing a more like multifaceted and very broad experience? Donald, would you like to start?
yeah, I'd say most of my yeah, I mean Homex was a huge project and I worked with I mean it started off with Anting and Ian. And Ian's from the north from St. Helens and Anting's from Taiwan. And they both have went to university here as well as abroad. But it helps. It actually sometimes helps because you can start to figure out one similarities or even differences, nothing bad or the other. But sometimes Anting would always say, I'm closer to Ian because of my cultural, growing up here, I'm culturally more connected to Ian himself than I am to, my kind of uh, Chinese or Asian kind of cultural background. Um, but it does definitely because you can never really discuss or even present something in its entirety, a subject matter of this and the kind of indication of the diaspora. So each individual iteration, people, you always say like we keep on coming back to this. It's because we have to keep on unraveling and trying to figure out something within it. And each successive artist and generation are chipping away slowly, to remove that kind of icing on the cake, to find the nuances underneath, which, no one person cannot do it on its own. And you can never say everything in one go. And so it requires multiple voices to be able to do it.
Thank you so much. Daya, do you want to add to that?
Definitely, yeah. I think I definitely agree with everything you both said about these experiences being like really nuanced and they're quite large and complex. And sometimes, like as I, we like one perspective, which is why one voice isn't all. But like for me, like um, collaboration and like co-creation comes through working a lot with communities, where they can, whether it's me making artwork with them, or it's like encouraging them to think about their own stories and contribute their own experiences. Um, so I think that's a way of kind of using my work as like a starting point, and then it leads to can lead to so many more perspectives and interpretations and point of views.
Yeah, that's so great because it stops you from like maybe flattening an experience as well. Like thinking about the community aspects and where the community enters. Like for us, having that mural be painted like over the week with folks entering to then respond to some prompts and paint little like symbols that represented home to them that then get like superimposed on the bigger mural, like switched out with like Velcro tape and things, like making this like living, collaborative, community focused idea of what home is was a really important part for our collaboration. That's making me think a bit about like, inviting the community into the work, as with the saris and the tactile experience, people being in the space for you, Daya, but also Donald specifically for yourself. I was thinking about the like performance aspect, the sort of gamification part of your work, and I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about, that bringing in an audience and negotiating like time zones and synchrony and what that meant for your work.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a technical feat trying to do something which occupied two different time zones. But it comes back to my architectural background. Has anyone ever seen the Berlin Philharmonic by the Honshuran? It's imagine like a theater space, or like um, an orchestra sitting within the center, and the whole of the audience are kind of wrapped around the center. So rather than kind of breaks that barrier between the observer and the observed, so you're kind of part of the actual what's the word event, which in a sense becomes more human in a sense. And the gamification one is I taught myself how to code. I come from a lot of my stuff is doing in 3D. 3D one links to both my previous practice, but it's gamification. I guess it moved away from the kind of the spectacle for a while. I think there was like a period in the noughties where everything was about this huge spectacle, and then they wanted to engage people even more. And of course, to engage people, you make them play. Um, I feel sometimes that it's a bit gimmicky, but I actually quite like it because it introduces, younger generations, um, who, that's the new way of reading, I guess.
Oh, I think that's an excellent entry point into our, talking about the like technological capacities that this allows for us as well. So Daya here as well, thinking about those technological aspects of the work and augmenting reach and the ways that maybe different audiences would engage um with your work. And I think I'll pose this to you as well, Donald, afterwards, but thinking about the like maybe different meanings that different generations or types of audience will have when engaging your work. And start with you, Daya.
Yeah, so I think adding like that technical aspect has really like opened up these different layers for people to connect. Like you've got the actual physical piece, but then you've got these other layers like the sound and the touch, which really makes it a bit more accessible and creates different opportunities to explore the layers of the stories. And I don't know, for me, it's the like a lot of culture and things like that we experience through our senses, and kind of like through the feel of fabric, sounds, textures. And I think integrating that technology has allowed me to bring those elements into my work in a way that expands that experience. Um, so yeah, and I think I've becoming more interested in my work not just being something that people can view, but they can actually become a part of, um, through that interaction and through kind of I don't know, it creates this really kind of unique experience where you're not just kind of emotionally able to connect, you're physically present as well. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Donald, did you have anything you wanted to add about the different ways that maybe different people might respond to the engagement features?
Yeah, I mean, like it is, you kind of like alienate one generation, whilst trying to, I mean, I come from a gaming background, so it appeals to me, but I kind of try to build up that relationship through, that's why I think I always come back to the mythical stories, because a lot of the older generation, they kind of remember those stories, in mythology and folk tales. And so of course we see it now, but it's kind of changed a bit. But like, being brought up, growing up here, like it was only till later in my kind of practice that I start to reflect on the Eastern mythologies. Um, but I find that as a way of connecting both, but also the language as well. The language, I kind of use both languages in terms of the traditional Chinese characters to, you know, um, Romanji. But yeah, sometimes that can be a little bit problematic because I can't read or write Chinese. Um, and neither could my grandma. It's typically that it's the grandma who would teach you how to read or write. My grandma couldn't, so I unfortunately I never went to Chinese school as well. It's too far away. And so that, like it's kind of like this level of like uh I sometimes do it so that the language is legible to both, but also it's sometimes illegible, so it plays on that kind of exoticization or exoticism of the perception.
Okay, I'm definitely going to come back to that because I think there's something really interesting about like that deliberately illegible and speaking to a specific community and so on, and also like reaching for language as a connection across. Yeah, like that's really rich. But Daya, I want to make sure I ask as well about this same question about the generational thing because Donald just said was thinking about the potential for alienation of some parts of your audience, but also other ways that they are brought in by speaking to, like mythology and bringing in language and stuff. I wanted to ask, how do like different generations of audience interact with your Sari? Like, how do they experience that differently, if at all?
I think like just like the visual language itself, it's very recognizable. Like people connect with it across generations. And I think that's something that doesn't belong to me. It's something that comes from our culture. And I think for a lot of the older generations and all generations, really, that's a point of connection. And I think even using a lot of these familiar objects that, like the market cart for a lot of the older generations, they were just like amazed to see that we've got something like that in the UK. So I thought there's these ways that you can kind of connect it, and then I think the technological aspect is a lot more from like the more younger kind of audiences. But it was interesting actually with the Sari that remembers because a lot of like even with adults, I think the way they interacted with the piece was a lot more, a little bit more hesitant. They preferred that more like, because I had some patches that were a bit more of an intimate experience where you listen to headphones and they preferred that kind of experience. Whereas a lot of the children were really excited to kind of explore and they're very confident with the map and everything. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to see these different generations being able to connect.
I love the idea of
It,
it also breaking down the the you must not touch part of like, and entering like formal art institution spaces,
Yeah,
it's
I
and
also
think
sorry, go
actually
ahead.
I like it when you said it doesn't belong to me because that's
Mhm.
really interesting with the kind of level of ownership,
For sure.
it's was it was it, I think in home ec we used two of those poems which are from two Chinese poems, and someone had said to me in an email saying I'm not allowed to use those I shouldn't be using those poems, um saying like that's this ownership of the Chinese culture because I was like, you're not even Chinese. I was like, am I not Chinese?
That's so, like, so even thinking about our own, again, our position and access and making things possible for everybody. And again, this is, like, I love what Daya said moment, but like the idea of the Sari is both ancient and futuristic. So it like does occupy this sort of liminal space in between that bridges those different generational and, the different changing meanings for it. So I'm thinking about that with, for instance, so some of the, you to the audience, you will receive, a lot of our recommendations and thoughts about things that inspired some of our work and some of the exhibitions that did so. And one of the first things that, like, might seem like maybe an obvious one to folks who've seen it, the, Museum of the Home and in the Life Between Islands exhibit at the Tate and Jeffrey, there was the Michael McMillan's, was it like the West Indian Front Room. And I remember going with my grandma when I was a child, back when it was still the Jeffrey Museum and stuff. And just like she was really interested in, she would just walk around pointing at things like paraffin lamp, we've got that. Do you remember what this was like? And it became this moment of her being able to use the art to explain her like early life to me and explain her movement, her experience of like meeting Britain for the first time and what that was. So, we've got all of these, like kind of an homage to that in our project as well, where the little glass figurines and stuff that everyone would have had are all appearing in there. And, you know, that storytelling aspect that, so I'm really excited to go home and, you know, put a VR headset on my grandma and see like how she how she deals with that, because, you know, like we've been recording her for so long and putting her into our work, myself and my sister, but she doesn't often get to see it back. She's sort of telling me and then I'm farming it. So right, so we have a couple
No,
questions in the chat, and oh, sorry, Donald, did you?
no, I was just gonna reflect on what you just said then about the bridging that liminal space, but also the object usage, because
Mm.
in a sense, like, you know, you're it seems to come across also. I mean, some of my work, and so I'm like, oh, why is it that we keep on kind of coming back to these objects? But because in a sense that it can only exist in this space, and so like you know because of the same cultural like mix. It has it that's the beauty of it, because it can't exist back in Hong Kong. You know, you won't have that same crockery, you won't have that something, and so that won't be part of the kind of the detail around your space itself. But yeah,
I
it's
mean,
really interesting. Mhm.
for us three like British diaspora kids as well, isn't there something really interesting about us all um recreating things from homes that aren't our, you know, like I've got these like, you know, for myself, objects from the Caribbean where I visit but I am not of, that then like expresses both my, you know, and we're all looking at like objects that do that. Like, any thoughts? Any, like, I'm, you know, mocking myself here now, but
No, I agree with you, because it's like it's a good archive. It's a good
yeah,
use of that. Like it kind of it's like a representation in time, isn't it?
right, yeah,
And
symbolic
so
objects that
yeah.
link us. Yeah. I just wanted to point out in the chat, like you might see in the comments that we've got some of your responses coming. Thank you guys for figuring that one out for me. But I also want to highlight that earlier there you received a comment. I love the way that the market stall in your work highlights transactions and implicitly people speaking and bartering with each other. And also there's a word cloud that has our shared like responses to like what home means, and a lot of it circles around some of these like common feelings of safety, place, love, recuperation, belonging, and the sensory coming up in there a lot. Oh, so question from Claire. I'm wondering how you define the community that we're reaching out to collaborate on the community focused artwork, who was invited to participate, and in the concept stage, how to decide on that. So for us in that mural part, it's something that I'm hoping to take around with to lots of different places. I did not restrict that in the same way that I restricted the participants in the VR house. This is like thinking about turning our lab space on campus into a sort of home. So we invite like high school groups in. When we have events, we have regular events where we feed you know, members of the community and beyond, and then, you know, just have like quiet painting sessions and stuff that are like structured around prompts. So it was really what anyone had, you know, experiences of home, and then because we can switch that out, we can kind of curate that experience after we've amassed a load of art, because the point is that we want it to keep growing and be a record of our space in our like physical space in that lab, which is the Black Communication and Technology Lab, which is home for lots of our students. Any other questions, please do keep them coming as well. Right, so thanks for sharing your meaning of and how you're using home as an idea. Are there any more examples of using tech to share stories of home? And if so, what was the audience response? Do either of you have other examples from your work that you might want to speak to? Examples of using tech to share stories of home and response.
Um, I one of my first usage of AR was I it was an image of it was a drawing of the chip shop that I grew up in. And it was for a normal printmaking drawing art competition. I can't remember what, I think it was Sherwood. And you you saw the tech. You, in a sense, you looked at through the lens of the actual camera itself to produce an AR, which was using the image that you see as a reference point or as a marker. Um, and by being able to share that, you could share something that you can't see unless you used something digital to actually access it. You know, it's a hidden underlying thing. Both adds the conceptual representation of it, but also, you know, it's a bit like, you know, when you talk to someone in your from your homeland or your native tongue when you're in school, like no one else knows what you're saying. But yeah.
Yeah. Daya, do you have any? I will happily, I'll go quickly, which is that I teach a class about digital placemaking, which is new. And, you know, in terms of engaging my students, I have them think about their ways that they like digitally, their digital footprint and how it maps their places in the world. So there's a couple things like what 3 words, which I think is really interesting, that these are like, you know, I think about like GIS mapping and stuff and like how that locates you. I have them look at their photos on their like, especially on Apple phones, and then like zoom out and see it on the map that tracks their own, like the places they've spent a lot of time. And they always find that really like kind of quite compelling, because, you know, they're snapping pictures and not necessarily thinking about it as part of like a picture of who they are and where they are. And then also looking at their own like social media choices, and then their, you know, the difference between their like, I'm snapping a picture of anything that's nearby me and not necessarily thinking about it because it's in my camera roll, versus the more intentional curation of like, these are the places that I go that I put on social media. I've Daya, like, do you want to talk a little bit more about like the tech in your work? I know that the coder that you've worked with is present with us at the moment as well.
Yeah, so
Ben.
Ben, I worked with Ben on the Sorry That Remembers, who brought my ideas to life. Um, yeah, so with tech, um, I'm quite I've started to use it, which is quite exciting. So I'm hoping to develop more pieces using tech to, and of course, the story is the most kind of important, but I've also been kind of thinking and exploring about using kind of how, like, in a space with installation, you can kind of transform someone, whether that's through light, whether that's through the sound, and kind of, yeah, kind of, I don't know if it's exploring that whole idea of like these like two places and giving that sense of like, yeah, I don't know, this kind of conflict and tension between that. So I'm really interested in kind of developing that aspect of the technical side.
Great, wicked, thank you. So we've got a few more questions coming in thick and fast now. So first of all, to either of you, feel free to take this one up. As someone who hasn't incorporated technology into their work at all yet, but whose work focuses on inclusion and accessibility, what are your recommendations on where to think about and where to start? Yeah, go ahead, Donald. Thank you.
I'm probably going to refer back to a pitch I did for a residency in somewhere in the south of London, and it was supposed to look at the local community. So there's a very huge Chinese community in the around kind of Southwark and that sort of area, and the one of the difficulties is that it's quite fractured and there's no real clear nose of the community, and also the kind of, you know, like social aspect of it is that, you know, I mean, my family, I'm not really into the arts, so that kind of being able to access the community or even including them, sometimes you have to kind of go down to something that speaks to them. I've tried to do it with the easiest one for in terms of my community is food. You know, that's always been a huge part of it. And more recently is dancing, because there's no issue with language. you know. You don't have to, you can speak together without words. And that helps.
I have a couple answers to that too, actually, because we were focused on so many different ways of, with working with so many different groups that had very different capacities with using tech. And so part of the 2-year project was, a reading group, but also like a series of workshops that taught people to use different tools. There are so many great open access, like digital tools that you can use that, like really add something to a lot of these projects. Like, so the map that was on that video that showed like the different places that housing co-op was in. That was like an intergenerational group working on that had, the combination of like scanning in photos all the way to like mapping the places on a map that, with little bits of history about when those co-ops were started, right? And then there's just like recording people. So we had a lot of conversations about oral history and soundscapes. So, having all of those different parts of tech, so like, the audio visual. There are also little apps like the people who made Pokemon Go, Niantic, they have like a scanner that you can 3D scan stuff just on your phone. Really good now. So there's like so many different like entry point ways into this kind of like inclusion, and lots of folks building these things in teams with their own families and stuff. That means that there's lots of ways to incorporate tech in. It's less daunting than it seems. As someone who is like very anti-learning to code, I don't know, it's just my hill. And it's very much possible. So I'm going to ask like 1 or 2 more questions. Thank you so much for bringing them in. We've got so thinking about permanent rather than temporary displays. How can museums represent or engage with these experiences across across centuries and cultures? So I think focusing on like how do we use tech to get at a permanence in displays for us?
I mean, it's almost yeah, go on, Daya, you start first.
Sorry to put you on the spot if you would like to.
I think with the digital aspect, there's quite an interesting because like for example, with my work, you've got the actual physical piece that can be exhibited, but there's also the kind of the documentation of that and where that lives. So like having a life beyond that exhibition online. So at the moment we've got like a trailer video that will hopefully come out soon. So it's kind of like you're not only accessing people that come to the museum, but also a whole wider global audience. So I think that's quite interesting.
I mean, it's an interesting way of saying it. It's use of permanence, because we keep on coming back to this impermanence and kind of because it's applicable to such a wide, broad reach that, I mean, that's the same problem that you have with the diaspora pavilion, no head rules all. Everyone has to sit within their, spaces. So you're almost like, the exhibition itself cannot be permanent. It has to be consistently transitioning.
Just like how our experience at home are. I think there's something so lovely about that, and also moving away from the idea that just because something is made digital, that it is permanent. Of course, we lose digital objects all the time, the same way that we might lose other types of ephemera. So but yes, like there's thinking about like open source materials and stuff like that, and the different ranges of access, like headset versus browser and so on. My question is, how has your relationship with home expanded through your art? For example, through exploring the Sari or Chinese poetry, how has engaging with these cultural forms changed or deepened your relationship with culture, both personally and as artists? So yeah, maybe one thought each to close us off. Daya, are you unmuting? You ready?
Yeah. I think for me, it's like I personally became quite distant from culture growing up, because I didn't feel, that belonging. It was through art that I started exploring these stories, and I think it's really deepened my connection with my family, but also like my grandparents.
Growing up here, you have to kind of reject your cultural background to assimilate, like you said, like the first poppy that grows puts its head above the rest will be chopped first. So we gotta keep low. But yeah, I definitely feel as if it has deepened my interest in it. Because it's like finding a new toy, I guess. You want to find more about it because you haven't been able to enjoy it for most of your childhood. So being able to recognize those things a lot later in life is that interest and like exploration, which hopefully expands your experiences and engagement both with your cultural background that you can relate to older generations as well as also bring it forward to the new generations.
For me, it's definitely something that combines like those answers, it's both a love letter to my actual family and, the ability to platform, because I think that they are arts. I think that her house is like a museum. I think that my sister's art, she started this as well with like painting our family Kodaks. And, like I always think about the fact that like, being able to see yourself represented is such a privilege that I'm trying to reproduce, and it then also becomes like a conversation with my, family across the diaspora and people as well. So yes, it allows for immortalizing things that I think are very, very important and like leaving that stamp behind, which I'm really proud to do. Yeah. So thank you again, everybody, and thank you so much to my co-panelists. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the space for allowing us to host this conversation.